Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring the most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mok-yeon. Just over 4 months into office, President Lee Jae-myung is entering a rare foreign policy sprint. This 40-day stretch from the UN stage to the APEC Leaders Meeting in Gyeongju is packed with high-stakes diplomacy. South Korea is hosting not only President Trump and President Xi Jinping, but also seeing symbolic movement with Japan. Prime Minister Ishiba's final summit included a joint pledge to tackle shared social challenges and a historic visit to the grave of Lee Soo-hyun, the Korean student who died saving a Japanese man in Tokyo. With Korea's regional role on the line, can this moment deliver more than just symbolism? For a deeper discussion on this, we connect with Choi Hyun Jin, professor of the Department of Political Science at Kyung Hee University. A big welcome.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
And also joining us is Andrew Millard, Assistant Professor of International Relations at Changwon National University. Good to see you, Professor.
Good to see you again.
Let's begin with Professor Choi, with a big picture first. So it's been over 4 months since President Lee took office, and while his domestic politics have been assertive, diplomacy has faced turbulence from the start. How would you evaluate the Lee administration's early foreign policy performance so far?
I think President Lee's first 4 months show strong plans at home, but big challenges abroad. I would call his foreign policy performance mixed but steady. The first, international situation has been very uncertain. The President Trump is pushing very hard on trade, and his request for $350 billion of investment, mostly in cash, is simply too big for Korean economy. So this has created a lot of pressure in the Korea-US relationship, even though our alliance with the US still is very important. And secondly, the administration is trying to keep a good relationship with China. The Foreign Minister Cho's recent visit to Beijing showed that the Korea wants to keep communication open with China. And China is still our largest trading partner. And we need a strong cooperation with China for both the security and the economy. So while the alliance with the United States is our priority, practical ties with China is also important. And third, as we saw, there was a recent raid at the Hyundai and LG plants in Georgia. It was a real shock for Korean people. Over 300 Korean engineers and workers were detained without any warning. And the Korean government, fortunately, moved very fast and negotiated their release and agreed with Washington to set up joint working group on visa problem. I think there was a good and quick response. So in general, the Lee administration is being pragmatic, but it faces very strong demands from Washington and also needed to maintain stable ties with Beijing. So next step is to shift from just reacting to events to taking the lead so we can better respond and protect our security and also economy.
Right. So taking a more proactive move in the coming months would be important. Then looking ahead, from the stretch from the UN General Assembly to the upcoming APEC Leaders Meeting in Gyeongju, it's widely being called South Korea's golden window for diplomacy. Professor Millard, what do you think are the key strategic priorities that really need to be tackled within this tight 40-day span?
So you're right. We now have this sort of 40-day period, well, now 31 days because it's the start of October already. If we go back to the UN last week, as Professor Choi just said a really nice word there. He talked about President Lee being very steady. And if we go back to the UN last week, to the General Assembly, the speech he gave there, and to the meeting he chaired at the Security Council, I would describe it as very safe. So steady is a good word as well. What President Lee really did well at the UN last week was he laid this very strong foundation for Korea. So he talked about several different issues. So he talked about AI, and he linked that in with the APEC meeting coming up in October. He talked about climate change, global peace, democracy, North Korea, and so on. So he set this foundation. What they need to do over the next 40 days is really maintain the momentum that he set up. So, for example, in the news broadcast just before this show, there was a short article on President Lee meeting with the CEO of OpenAI. So this focus on AI, this is a very good move. This is showing that South Korea, it's not even just a regional player now, it's becoming a global player. And so this is really what South Korea over the next month really needs to keep emphasizing. South Korea, it's a global player, not just a regional player. And it needs to start doing this with China. So President Xi will be coming to Korea. Now, relations with China are slowly starting to improve, but there are a few issues. So they want to maintain good relations with China to make sure they do come. And the same with the US, as Professor Choi mentioned, there are several issues with the US right now. So making sure we maintain good relations really is the key point before APEC starts.
Right, so we should be able to keep the momentum going. Then let's also touch upon Washington, as you've mentioned, Professor Millard. So this whole Washington relationship seems under strain. Of course, the tariff talks, the Georgia labor arrests, and the $350 billion investment demand that still needs some details. President Lee has responded with what he calls principled resistance. In your view, do you think it's the right approach, or is it kind of risky for us?
Well, with President Trump in office, anything is risky, let's be honest. Really, South Korea at the moment kind of has two options. It can be more resilient against the US, which does have some risks. We know that Donald Trump can be a little bit more emotional. He says himself that he's a bit thin-skinned. If you don't have that good personal relation, he may use it against South Korea. But the only other option otherwise is that South Korea kind of just gives in, and which would be very weak. So I really think that being more resilient, having some resistance, a bit of pushback against the US is the right move. In terms of these issues, if you look at the issue with the Georgia incident, where these 300 South Koreans were arrested and deported, maybe this is where, in terms of the tariff negotiations, there could be a little bit of leverage for the South Korean government. Donald Trump, he came out and said, oh, we're sorry, we kind of made a bit of a mistake with that one. We don't want to put off other countries from investing in the US. So this is where they can use that a little bit in the tariff negotiations. When it comes to the 350 billion, as Professor Choi mentioned, that they want in cash, Professor Choi was right. South Korea cannot afford this. And what the South Korean government really needs to remember is that Donald Trump does not care about South Korea. Donald Trump, for those 300 arrests, that was good target numbers. For the 350 billion in cash, he can then use this to show his MAGA base, to show the Republican Party, we had our targets, we've reached our targets, regardless of whether this is good or bad for the US-South Korea relation. So I think that's very important for the Korean government to remember and maintain a bit of pushback against the US.
Right. As Professor Millard mentioned, the challenge between the two countries is not only just a trade issue, it's tangled, a mix of tariffs, capital flows, and even human rights as well. So at this point, Professor Choi, what kind of diplomatic safety nets do you think Korea should be able to be looking to secure to manage this complex equation?
You're right. So this is no longer just a trade issue. It is now a mix of tariff and also the labor law and the investment and even human rights of workers and engineers. So that means Korea needs some stronger safety net in our diplomacy now. But nevertheless, we need to recognize that the alliance with the United States is still the #1 priority. With the growing threat from North Korea, including possible development of tactical nuclear weapon, and also growing military ties between North Korea and Russia. So US-Korea alliance is still the most important foundation for our security. But nevertheless, we should still use multilateral forum like the G20 and APEC, because these platforms can help ease tension and give us more neutral ground to settle disputes before they turn into a bigger problem. And third, we need direct working groups with Washington on visa issues and labor issues and tariff as well. So this can stop small issues from growing, as we saw in Georgia. And also, finally, the Korea should also strengthen our cooperation with the other partners, such as ASEAN, European Union, and India. This can make our economy more balanced and less dependent on one side. So in general, still the alliance with the United States is the cornerstone for our security, with especially threat coming from North Korea is growing. But at the same time, as you said, we must use wider diplomacy as a safety net to make sure our economy and security remain stable.
Right. Speaking of, expanding our diplomatic targets, let's bring it to the APEC. So this will be Korea's first major multilateral stage under the Lee presidency, with both President Xi Jinping and President Trump in attendance. So as a host, then, Professor Miller, what kind of leadership does Korea actually need to show to not just survive, but actually shape the regional agenda?
So again, if we bring it back to last week, he came up with all of these different ideas of climate change, of peace denuclearization, he mentioned with North Korea, and so renewable energies, AI. These are all issues which are very much regional issues in Asia Pacific right now, but again, also global issues. So this is a hugely important opportunity for South Korea, again, to show we are a global player, not just a regional player, but a global player. They're taking the leadership roles. So I think it's been very strategic that the South Korean government presently, they haven't really been focusing on issues that they can't control. They're starting to be very strategic and only focus on things like AI, which they have a lot of expertise in. They can become global players in. Now, when it comes to APEC, as you mentioned, we do have Xi Jinping, we do have Donald Trump scheduled to be attending. What I hope doesn't happen is that these two very big, powerful leaders don't come to Korea and take too much of the limelight away from President Lee, away from South Korea. I hope that President Lee is able to sort of suppress them a little bit and really take a leadership role in the whole summit.
Right. Let's hope for that to happen in the coming weeks. But staying on that note, so all eyes will definitely be on the so-called Gyeongju Declaration. Professor Che, with issues like free trade, nuclear disarmament, and human rights all on the table, tension between the U.S. and China is definitely expected. How can Korea really act as an honest broker, and what would count as a diplomatic win in such kind of divided room?
That's an important question. The Gyeongju Declaration will be very important, but at the same time, we should be realistic. So on sensitive and political issues like human rights violation or nuclear disarmament or ongoing tariff negotiation or even South China Sea, honestly speaking, I think it will be almost impossible for the US and China to make agreement, because these kind of topics are too politically charged. But there is more chance for agreement in less controversial areas. That was already mentioned by Professor Millard. That those topics include climate change, energy security, digital economy, and also AI. So on these kind of issues, all countries have a shared interest, and cooperation is more practical. So for Korea, the smart approach is to guide the talks toward this more achievable area. And I think it's a success would be to include clear commitments on their future-oriented topics. And at the same time, we must make sure that disagreements on political issues do not block progress. So this way, Korea can show leadership as a host country while keeping APEC members united around more practical cooperation.
Right, definitely. So hosting is just one thing, but steering the conversation is where real influence actually comes in. Now, so Xi Jinping is visiting Korea for the first time in 11 years, and Donald Trump is also here, his first visit since being reelected. Professor Millard, how significant is it that these summits are happening in Gyeongju, not Seoul, and what does Korea stand to gain or lose with this?
So you're right. Xi Jinping has not been to Korea since 2014, where Park Geun-hye was in power. And then Moon Jae-in was there in Beijing in 2017 and 2019. Since then, the relationship with China has sort of soured a little bit. There's been various issues, even as lately as President Yoon towards the end of his term in office. What we're starting to see now is slowly improving relations, but we still do have a few small issues. And then, of course, as we mentioned with the US, those various issues. So there are some things that we need to look at. The fact that it's happening in Gyeongju, I'm going to speak a little bit more on a personal opinion here. I could not be happier. What we see in Korea right now is a huge magnet effect where everything goes to Seoul. What I really want to hope from this APEC summit is that Korea shows off more than Seoul. That we come down to Korea, we show the Chinese, the Americans, all of the other nations attending. This is what the rest of Korea has to offer. Various industries, heavy industries, steel industries, shipbuilding, automobiles, defense industries, logistics, everything that is based down here in Gyeongju, in Busan, in Gyeongsangnam-do, Gyeongnam-do. This is really a huge opportunity to show the world Korea is more than just Seoul. So I know Gyeongju, they're working very hard to prepare for this APEC summit, and I really hope it boosts the regional economy in Korea.
Right, so let's hope this would be a great opportunity for the whole nation as well. Now, let's also touch upon the Korea-Japan summit. Like we've said in the intro, Prime Minister Ishiba's final summit with President Lee ended with a joint pledge on shared challenges and a symbolic visit to the Lee Soo-hyun's grave. So from a results-based perspective, Professor Choi, how would you evaluate the outcomes of this latest meeting?
I think the Busan summit with Japan was symbolic but also practical. First, it confirmed the shuttle diplomacy between the two countries. After President Lee's Tokyo visit in August and Prime Minister Ishiba's visit to Busan, we now have a regular system of a two-way visit. That means more stable talk on economy and security between the two countries. And secondly, on historical issue, there was no breakthrough, but both leaders showed a positive tone. The President Lee, for example, spoke about facing history but looking to the future, and Prime Minister Ishiba stressed the importance of honesty and courage. So I think this kind of a tone is creating space for future dialogue on historical issues. And finally, as a tangible outcome, the two sides agreed to launch a Korea-Japan Common Social Issues Council. And this body is designed to deal with shared challenges beyond history and security, such as demographics, technology, and also social policy. And I believe the creation of this council shows that the bilateral relationship is broadening, is becoming more institutionalized. So I think the summit with Japan didn't solve every problem, but it is a good symbol of shuttle diplomacy. And also we created a new council and also and finally kept the relationship between the two countries on a stable and future-oriented path.
Right, and let's hope that momentum would continue in the years to come. Now, finally, before we conclude our discussion, with both the UN and APEC behind him, this could be the last real shot for South Korean President Lee Jae-myung to build diplomatic traction in the year 2025. So, Professor Millard, what risks do you see if Korea actually fails to seize this moment, and how much is really at stake?
So you're right. This is sort of for 2025. APEC will be sort of the last major global meeting of the year. So they do need to take this opportunity. In reality, I don't see there being a huge risk unless there's a major diplomatic disaster along the way, which I don't foresee happening. What South Korea has the opportunity here is to really build itself as like I said, a global leader, to take those issues of AI, climate change, energy security, and really build some good relations with the other regional players. So rather than seeing possible risks, I see there being a lot of opportunity here. And we just hope that South Korea takes those opportunities and doesn't miss them.
Definitely. So if Korea actually gets it right, it won't just manage the moment. It would, redefine its role on the global stage, and
Right.
We'll hope to see that in the weeks to come. But as for now, we'll have to conclude our discussion right here. Thank you so much for your insights, Professor Millard.
Thank you.
And Professor Choi, of course, we really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
And that'll be all from us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in again next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Till then, stay informed and engaged.